Beneath the badge of a tough New York cop lies Ralph Sarchie's darkest secret, a lifelong battle with forces that defy logic and prey on the human soul. From his first haunting encounter in the dead of night to chilling cases that shook his faith in reality, Ralph's journey plunges into the shadowy world of the supernatural, where the lines between good and evil blur. In this episode of Deceptive Reality, uncover the terrifying moments that turned a hardened skeptic into a reluctant warrior against the darkness. But be warned, some things once heard cannot be forgotten. Are you ready to face the evil that follows?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another very deceptive episode of the Very Deceptive Reality podcast, featuring Nick and the effulgent Bert.
Am I
that one sounds bad
now?
You're an effulgent.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know. It might be similar because it means radiantly shining or brilliant.
Sounds like if I exfoliated, Nick.
You are exfoliated and effulgentated.
I will say I do like to exfoliate.
Well, that's good. It's healthy for you.
Yeah. I find as I get older, skin prefers to be exfoliated.
Oh, I just shed like a gecko on a rock. You'll just find a whole shell of me laying out on a warm rock somewhere.
That's kind of savage, Nick. It's kind of savage.
Yeah, it's spooky, especially the first time it happened. I didn't know what was going on.
Wow. That's crazy.
Way to start off.
Listen, when we come in, we bust the doors wide open, Nick. We are not scared to come charging in.
Yep. Kick the doors of the saloon open and yell nonsense at everyone that confuses everyone.
That's doggone right.
That's what we're about.
It's been an interesting one. We did, not that you guys are going to know a difference, but we went from the last one, when we record right now, the one we did last week was for the Salem witch trials. And for these folks that's going to be seeing this, we would have done 4 total episodes of mine, two-parters. So pretty much the entire month of December, we screwed them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people will probably have noticed by now that we've changed video format.
Yes.
And my thoughts on that were like, let's not do old format, new format, old format again. So we flip-flopped one of my episodes.
Yep.
Because it had old format. So that's why we did that. There was a reason to the madness.
There's logic. Sometimes it's hard to believe, but here for Nick, it's accepted. It's expected. For me, people goes, he had a plan for this? Yeah, I actually do have plans. I know that's shocking.
Oh, what are they talking about? You're the plan guy.
I know,
you're the Excel spreadsheet that keeps this podcast going. I'm telling you.
It's funny because I do talk to people occasionally and they're like, man, it must be, who was it I was just talking to recently? I can't even remember. We was talking to like, so we know you do the podcast stuff, like you do the video editing and stuff. They was like, what's Nick do? Like all the behind the scenes stuff? I'm like, yeah, 100%.
Not really.
He does all the hard stuff. Listen, I'm just the face. Yeah. I do a little video editing here and there.
You guys always wonder why Bert's so happy when he's on these episodes, because as soon as we're done, we lock him in an editing cage and that's where he goes.
I'm allowed to get out occasionally.
Yeah, every Monday.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the funny thing is a lot of the stuff when we make changes here is because I've tried something on my channel and I'm like, man, that really worked well.
Right.
Thank goodness I don't try some of the things I try over there, because some things don't work real well. And I can go, yeah, we're not bringing that to our other channel because that would completely screw that channel up. So,
well, this most recent one with the videos is a hugely positive change, and I'm really excited for that.
yeah, I think it's
for people to see
faster.
it.
I think it's more riveting from a mysterious standpoint. I think it looks better for
definitely
shorts.
spookier.
Oh yeah, way spookier. I think it looks better for shorts.
Yeah.
And it's faster.
Yeah, it's definitely faster, and we can make it more expressive and stuff like that. For anyone who didn't know, the ones we were doing before were based off of like, it's sort of evolved. It was originally like, what was it, the 50s graphic novels or something like that.
Yes.
And then we had a lot of luck with doing in the style of Tales from the Crypt comics for a while. But I think the real life looking ones are like much more on brand with what we're doing.
Not only that, but we can be as mysterious as we want to. Like, I think back to some of my favorite movies. And, you know, some of my favorite ones is where I don't actually see the monster. It's just implied.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, like when you watch like 3/4 of Godzilla and then you see Godzilla for like the last 20 minutes of something, you know.
That most recent Godzilla that was very popular, what was it? Godzilla -1?
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. I want to see it.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't say too much about it, but he's hardly in it. I'll say that. The Haunting of Hill House, the original story, which I do find very terrifying. It's not even 100% certain there is a haunting there.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes the things you don't know or the things you don't see are way scarier than the things you do.
Correct. That's the beauty of this new style that we're using. We can be as, because you kind of have to look close anyway. And you're like, did I just see something or did I not just see something?
Yeah, because sometimes there's stuff hidden in there. I know when I'm doing it, I'm going to be like hiding little bits and pieces in there. And in fact, the new AI tools from Photoshop's going to help me do that. So,
yeah, that's what I like.
Be on the lookout for Easter eggs.
For this week on my podcast, which right now I'm doing stories from this book. It's called True Hauntings and something else. It's like little mini stories. But I'm rewriting them to where it's kind of like more, because the way they took letters from people and they just put them in the book.
Oh, okay. Just like straight to the book.
Yeah, it's just straight to the book. So what I'm doing is I'm taking it and I'm rewriting it in third person because everyone sends these in first person. And then I'm adding emotion and stuff to them, but I'm keeping the core of the story the same. But what's really cool is and I didn't even mean to do it. Like, it was completely by accident. But there's a story where this guy's petting his dog and he looks up the stairway and there's this little boy that's like at the top of the stairs. And when I created the image for it, you could just barely see the boy. And I'm like, I wonder what happens if I put this in the video creation and I put it in there. And it was like the creepiest photo or creepiest 6-second video. And I'm like, that's perfect. I'm not sure what I saw. And I'm like, that's perfect.
Did it materialize the boy or was it just like a swirling mat? Oh, yeah. That's going to be cool.
Yeah. So it's like you see him walk. And here's what's crazy, but it's like so dark you can't really see. And then there's like this darkness that fills the entire frame, and then a light that goes on to him so you can see him, and then it dematerializes back out.
Oh yeah, that's going to be awesome.
I couldn't have done that if I wanted to. It just worked so well.
It sounds like it's a little bit like how we did the Halloween episode, but you're taking it to another level for this.
Yes, because even with that, we was doing the cartoon. So now it's taking images and I'm not putting any words in there. I'm just like, what can you do with this? And it's like, it's basically like, what the hell is this? And it's like, well, here you go. Enjoy.
Here's something.
And I'm like, wow. Okay,
I think it's awesome. I like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So, but I think it's going to be really cool for our channel. I think that This style gives more of the mystery. It's not as cartoonish. And honestly, the whole reason we went to a cartoon was because YouTube changed some of the rules on AI generation.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just don't want to deal with that. So we went to cartoons. But now this is kind of the same way. It's like, you know, this is the way we're doing it now. Just deal with it.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to make a spot of difference to them either, because I've seen a lot of people doing it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. 100%. So, yeah, I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be an interesting way to look at it. Now, do you remember why we do the video stuff?
Why we do the video stuff?
We started out not necessarily doing the cartoons. We started out doing images. But do you know where the original cartoon concept came up? Or not the cartoon, but the original idea to add those kind of clips in there came from?
I do not remember.
Our Christmas special.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Because before that, we just had a still image that you watch through the entire narration.
Yeah, this is objectively better.
Yeah. You know, but it's funny.
I think this keeps people's eyes on it.
Oh, yeah, because we, you know, we're trying new things all the time. That's the thing. Like, our podcast is significantly different than others because a lot of people's like, that's cool, and then they just ride with it. But I feel like we're like, how can we one up this one thing we did? And we're constantly doing that.
Yeah, that's right. I like the scarier, more real, grittier direction we've gone. And I kept that in mind for this episode. This is one that wouldn't do good with cartoons. This is gritty, on the streets. It's serious. It's evil. It's all the things that you don't want cartoons on.
It's all of our favorite things.
It's all of our favorite things. And it would not, once you listen to a little bit of this, you'd realize that it wouldn't do good with the cartoons looks. This is things we're going to have like probably like police images and crime scene photos and that kind of stuff like that.
Oh, this is big time excitement.
Have I caught your attention at all?
You've completely got my attention, Nick.
Yeah, this is a long one. There's 5 segments and they're a little bit longer than normal. And each one is almost its own story.
Oh, wow.
But it's all from the same fella, and he has had an adventurous life.
Now, I am curious because you don't typically do longer segments. You typically keep your segments short.
No.
The videos
that you did
ones. With the new way we do it, was it faster than cartoons on the shorter?
Way faster.
Yeah.
Way faster.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and the formatting tool for prompts that you wrote us made it incredibly easy. So overall, this is easier and it suits the stories better.
You guys know what that means. We can do longer stories now and not worry about how long it takes us to create some of the behind the scenes stuff. Like the talking stuff we do here is easy. Editing the videos, easy. The longest part, for the most part, is the narration at this point.
Right.
And research.
But we're getting better.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's good for you guys. It means we can have longer story. I like the longer story format. The last 4 episodes that we did, which was my two-parters back to back, they were longer, but I feel like that adds more to the story.
I think it does. I think it takes a while. Like there's a reason that movies have gotten longer as time goes on, because they want to flesh it out a little more. Yes. And that's what we're going to do from time to time.
Well, I'm excited to know what this story is, Nick. For once, I get to kind of sit back. It's not one of my stories. Enjoy.
No, this is going to be you're going to have a long time to listen and enjoy between these. But are you ready to hear about someone's life that went from everyday normal until they fell into the unknown?
I was born ready, Nick.
The Bronx was its usual chaotic self that night. The streets were alive with their endless chorus of honking cars, distant shouts, and the occasional crackle of a police scanner breaking through the noise. For Ralph Sarchie, it was just another shift. He'd been working the night beat for years, dealing with the worst the Bronx had to offer: drug busts, shootings, violent robberies. Nothing fazed him anymore. At least that's what he thought. The call came in around midnight. A domestic disturbance on a quiet residential block, at least as quiet as the Bronx ever got. Ralph's partner, Joe, rolled his eyes as the dispatcher read off the details. A woman had called 911, claiming her husband was possessed. They both chuckled at the absurdity of it. Possessed. In this neighborhood, it was probably just booze, drugs, or a bad temper. Still, a call was a call. When they arrived, the house seemed almost too quiet. The porch light flickered as if it couldn't decide whether to stay on or give up. Ralph rapped on the door, announcing their presence, but no one answered. He glanced at Joe, who shrugged. That's when they heard it, a muffled crash from inside, followed by a woman's voice, high-pitched and trembling, shouting something they couldn't quite make out. Ralph didn't wait. He twisted the doorknob, it was unlocked, and stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the dimly lit living room. The place was a mess. Overturned furniture, shattered picture frames, a broken lamp lying in pieces on the floor. In the corner, a woman sat hunched over, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She was shaking, her face pale and streaked with tears. "He's in there," she whispered, pointing toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. "It's not him anymore, it's something else." Joe leaned in and murmured, "Drunk or high?" Probably smacked her around. Ralph nodded, though something about the woman's expression unsettled him. There was a raw terror in her eyes that didn't seem like it could be explained away by alcohol or drugs. They approached the door cautiously, Ralph's hand resting on the butt of his gun. He knocked once. No response. He knocked again, harder this time. From inside came a low, guttural growl that sent a chill crawling up Ralph's spine. He shot a glance at Joe, who muttered, "What the hell was that?" The woman started sobbing behind them. "I told you. It's not him. It's not him." Ralph pushed the door open, and what he saw made him freeze. The man, if you could still call him that, was crouched in the corner of the room, his back to them. His body was twisted unnaturally, his shoulders hunched, his head tilted at an odd angle. The air in the room was thick and heavy, carrying a foul stench that made Ralph's stomach churn. "Sir, stand up and turn around," Ralph ordered, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his chest. The man didn't move. Then, in one horrifying motion, he twisted his head around without turning his body, fixing them with a gaze that Ralph would never forget. His eyes were black, completely black, like bottomless pits, and his mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too jagged. He let out a laugh, deep and guttural, that made the hairs on Ralph's arms stand on end. Joe reacted first, stepping forward and shouting, "Stand down now!" But before he could reach the man, the figure sprang to life, moving with an unnatural speed. He lunged at them, his hands clawing through the air. Ralph and Joe wrestled him to the ground, struggling against a strength that didn't match his wiry frame. As they pinned him, the man let out a series of guttural, inhuman sounds, a mix of growls and words in a language Ralph couldn't understand. The stench in the room grew worse, and Ralph felt a sudden pressure, as if the air itself was pressing down on him. Finally, with a combined effort, they managed to cuff the man, who went limp, his body collapsing like a puppet with its strings cut. The woman peeked into the room, trembling. "He'll come back," she whispered. "It always comes back." Ralph wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything would be fine, but the words caught in his throat. Something about the way the man had moved, the sound of his voice, the look in his eyes. It defied everything Ralph thought he knew about the world. As they escorted the man out of the house, he began to hum softly, a low, haunting tune that Ralph would hear again that night, echoing in his dreams.
I didn't know it yet, but that night marked the beginning. The first crack in my hardened worldview. I told myself it was just another crazy case, nothing more. But deep down, I knew something was waiting for me on the other side of the darkness.
What did you think of Ralph's introduction to the unknown?
It was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was pretty traumatic because there's some pieces of background that I sort of want to tell you about, in that he grew up in a somewhat religious family, but he was a staunch disbeliever in everything supernatural.
So he was a
first
skeptic,
happened,
as we call it.
He was an absolute skeptic, and he sort of looked down on the superstitious beliefs of his family. But then he got into this situation and he was like, something ain't right here. This isn't quite normal, kind of thing. And what you're going to find out later on is there's years in between these occurrences. But it seems like once you get pulled into this world, it keeps coming up more and more. And I wonder, is it because you notice more? Or, like, are you on the alert more? Or are you somehow marked by these things?
You know, I always question that because, you know, you and I have talked about this before. Whenever I watch, like, the Watcher channel, they do those paranormal investigations. One guy is an absolute believer, and the other guy is 100% skeptic. The believer always gets the stuff.
Right.
The non-believer gets very little.
What do you think the cause of that is? Like, that always seems to be the way.
I think it's energy. I really do think it's energy.
Yeah.
I think it's the energy that we put out. There was a similar conversation that was on the Jack Osborne podcast. This was probably 6 months ago.
Right.
And he was talking to a psychic medium. And she refers to entities typically based on, like, let's use, for example, she'll be like, this is a spirit, or this is a ghost, or this is an elemental, or this is this or that, or whatever. And she had said she went to another, I want to say England or someplace like that. And they kept referring to an entity that she had never heard of it. And these other mediums would be like, it's right there. Do you not see that? And she's like, no, I don't see what you're talking about.
Right.
And she said, as she was there and she started learning what it was, eventually she could see it also, but it took that length of time to learn it. So it's like, is it the energy that we put out that is looking at this and going, basically make yourself present?
Right.
If that makes sense. I just had like an Elon Musk moment where I'm like, how am I going to navigate this wording? I was trying to wordsmith it in my head to make sense. Because
I think I've got a good. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, my parents, they're always like, when you go extra dimensional, I get confused. So I'm like, we're going to try to not go extra dimensional.
Man, I don't know. That's some of my favorite talks when you get into that stuff. I like that. Too. We can't avoid it entirely, but
no.
I've got an analogy which I think works really well for this. Imagine that you're going into a museum at night. It's you're going in first and someone's coming in behind you. Now, there's lasers that set off a silent alarm, and you walk through the whole museum, and as far as you're concerned, nothing happened. But the person comes along behind you and they know what to look for, and they spray some of that mist and they see lasers, and they crawl through the lasers and they go through the museum. You both went through the same area, but you had very different experiences because he was open to what's going on and you weren't.
That's a good analogy. But it also makes me wonder.
So.
Like, it also makes me wonder, like, does everything exist? But we're not giving some things power. Like, do trolls exist? Do fairies exist? Do gremlins?
I'm glad you... Let me stop you on fairies for a moment, because this fits really well with what you're saying, that fairies used to be regular people tall.
Oh, yeah.
Fairies, leprechauns, all that stuff. But as belief grew smaller in them, they grew smaller. So how easy it is to see something does belong in belief according to mythology anyway.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you ever watch that movie, Buddy the Elf? People just stopped believing in Santa Claus and the sleigh couldn't get off the ground.
Yeah. We got to power these sleighs or we're never going to see anything cool.
Up, Nick. Crazy.
Yeah. But I think it could be that. But also think about this. Have you ever, and I think I alluded to this a couple weeks ago or maybe even last week, have you ever not noticed something for a long time and then you notice it and now you don't stop seeing it?
All the time. Especially like when you get a new car, you're like, man, I want to get this car because I never see it on the road ever.
Right. And now every car is like that.
Now every freaking car is my car in the same color.
Right. I thought around here, white cars used to be kind of rare because when I'd see one, I'd be like, oh, is that the cops? And like slow down or whatever. But then I got a white car and now I realize there's like, I'd say 50% of our cars are white out here.
Well, and I have another story that kind of fits in line with this, Nick. Now, I've not told anybody, including my own podcast, this story.
You get it here first. Listen up, subscribe.
Folks. Exactly. You best. I better get some subscribes out of this. Put in the comments down below. Only subscribe because you told your story. So we did our Halloween special. And it, we worked on that for couple weeks. We released it. And I'm like, man, this is the first year where nothing really happened in my house. Cool. Oh. It's kind of nice. Yeah. Not saying I don't like having crazy things happen, Nick, but in my house.
We're all a bit the crazy.
But when it's in your house,
that's your safe zone.
Safe zone. Like, don't enter.
Yeah.
So Jess and I are talking. I'm in the kitchen. And we have a habit, like when we're vacuuming downstairs, sometimes we'll move the vacuum to the kitchen, and the handle, it gets to about, I don't know, like close to where the middle of my back is. And we always put it, if you walk into my kitchen, there's like an island in the middle, and then I've got all my counters with my stove and my oven, and there's two sets of doors. There's a door to the left and a door to the right, and one goes into the dining room and the other one goes into like the hallway that then goes into my front room. I'm talking and I'm laughing and I'm joking around with Jess, and while I'm doing it, I'm backing up and I'm looking at her, and then I stop because it felt like a hand on my back. And my kids, if I'm backing up, especially my 3-year-old going on 4, like if I'm backing up, she seems to put the hand out, and I felt my shirt and everything cave into my back. So I kind of stopped. You know how you get off kilter a little bit and you're like, oh crap, like I don't want to knock someone over or something over. Turn around, nothing.
Really?
Nothing. Nothing at all. And it was just probably the week of, I was thinking, nothing happened in my house this year. Like, that's wild. Like, the last Halloween special.
You started thinking about it.
That's what I'm saying. Did I put that energy out there? Because I looked at Jess, and Jess is like, what's wrong with you? And I'm looking around. I'm like, so then I start messing with my shirt and stuff to try to figure out, was there a way that I could have maybe moved to where my shirt compressed in like that? But then it literally felt like I ran backwards into my vacuum, and the handle, like the way the handle would hit, my vacuum wasn't in that room at all. And there was so much room between me and the wall, I wasn't even close. But it literally felt like a hand touched my back and stopped me, like to the point to where, you know, like when someone puts their hand, you know how you feel the shirt like compress into your back?
Right. Yeah.
That's exactly what it felt like.
That's crazy. Yeah. I think your thought about powering things up, it kind of fits. Because like maybe this whatever is in your house only has enough energy to affect the world when you're thinking about it, when you're giving it thought. It's that little extra juice that it needs to interact with you and the objects in your house.
You know what, like I think?
Maybe that's the secret.
I don't think it has anything to do with the house at all.
No?
Things like the Eye of Sauron.
Like it can get you anywhere?
You put that energy out there somewhere and it's going to lead whatever that is to you. That's
so
what
once it leads something to you, does it stay or does it just
I don't know.
Mess with you for a bit?
Since that happened, and this happened a week ago, nothing. It was just like one. It was that split. It was like not even a second. Like I felt the hand almost like stop, and then I stopped. And I kind of tripped backwards because I was scared it's going to knock over the vacuum or something like that. But then when I looked around, I'm like, oh, there's legit nothing there. And then I spent probably like a minute trying to replicate the feeling.
Right.
And I couldn't do it. I could not replicate it at all.
That's so weird. That's so weird. So weird. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that you were talking about it and it happened.
No. Well, I didn't talk about it. Jess and I were talking about something completely unrelated, but it was like a week before I started laughing because I kept going in my kitchen like, what's going to happen? Like last Halloween, we had a lot of activity.
Yeah, so you were telling us about that.
Yeah. And this year, nothing. So I started going up, and every time I go up, I'd laugh and I'd be like, man, that's crazy. Like, I wonder why. In my head, I'm like, why did it happen last Halloween, but nothing happened this Halloween? Right. And then it was like maybe not even, I don't even think it was a week. I want to say it was a few days after that. And then I felt that hand, and that's the only thing I've had that I've experienced, that I've acknowledged anyway. Because I think things can happen, but maybe we just don't acknowledge it. We just go, okay, that was whatever. Yeah. That wasn't, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't walk around going, that was a ghost. You know what I'm saying? Right.
Because you'd be in an asylum before very long.
For sure. 100%.
If you were doing that.
But let's use, for example, like we're going to the Hinsdale house and we're going to the Wildwood next year. Yeah. Like the fact that we're going with the anticipation that there's haunted stuff there, are we in essence calling, like putting the beacon out there?
I sure hope so.
I know. It's going to be interesting. I'm super curious.
I'm going to be like the whole way there. I'm going to be like, come get us, come get us, come get us, come get us.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be, I don't know. I'm super curious about that because again, people that don't believe, they never have experiences, and people that do believe seem to have an abundance of them. And occasionally, like in the story we're talking about today, there is a crossover where there's a skeptic, but then the question becomes, is the other people having the experiences that causes the paranormal? Then they come in. Now, the question that I would ask is, because of that one moment that flipped a light switch for this person going forward, then are they more adept to be able to either call that power in or potentially to see something that they've been not acknowledging in the past?
So this is sort of, I'm glad you said it that way, because this is sort of an exploration of that, because I believe that there can be 2 people or 3 people or however many people having a legitimate supernatural experience. And since that's already ongoing, a skeptic could come in and experience that.
Yes.
And it would almost like it would attach to them because it opened their mind a little bit to it.
Similar to that psychic, like we was talking about before. All these other psychics are seeing this thing that she can't see.
Yep. Exactly.
I want to say it was like a shade or something. They kept saying, that's a shade. Oh, okay. That thing you're seeing right there's a shade. Yeah. And she's like, I don't see nothing. Or maybe it was a djinn. I think it was maybe a djinn.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because a lot of people aren't familiar with that term.
Yes. And then once she started doing research and she was like, why can't I see this? And she started doing more research on it.
Right.
And of course she's like, well, this is the same thing I would see in our country because she's from the US. And she's like, maybe, you know, they're just thinking they're seeing it. But then once she was able and she acknowledged everything about it, then slowly she was like, at first it was very like dim. Like I knew it was there, but I couldn't see it. And then as time progressed, I could see it. I could acknowledge, you know, oh man, I didn't even think about that. I just pieced that together in my head.
Yeah.
What if that's why ghosts start out with like scratching noises and then they move to knocking. And maybe they're building up that energy to then manifest or progress in the haunting.
Right. Yeah, so that's sort of like parallel to something we've discussed about demons and demonic presences before, is they pull down the walls, the ghosts put out more force.
Yes.
So one's wearing you down, one's getting energy from actually kind of the same concept.
Same. Yeah, it's the same for both.
Really, you're giving both of them power.
Correct.
So, I mean, as we go on, and I want you to listen to the next segment in just a moment, but one thing I want to make you mindful of is as we go through these segments, because each one's a new experience for this guy who's slowly opening up to this stuff. I want you to just try to think about the parallels between each of these experiences. And I also want you to keep in mind that his partner's seeing this, all the witnesses are seeing this, and no one's ever contradicted him when he came out with his books. So this is a lot of witnesses we're getting here.
I'm down for it.
Keep that in mind. Look if there's parallels to each one and just remember them.
Okay.
But let's go into the next segment.
10-4,
The call came just past 11 p.m. A family had returned home to find their house in complete disarray. Furniture overturned, mirrors shattered, claw-like marks scratched into the walls. Initially, Ralph thought it was a straightforward break-in. Burglars trash a house when they don't find what they're looking for. It wasn't uncommon in the Bronx. But as Ralph approached the address with his partner, something felt off. The house stood apart from its neighbors, surrounded by a sagging chain-link fence and cloaked in shadow. The porch light flickered faintly, just like the one from the possession case years earlier. Ralph tried to shake the feeling of déjà vu as he knocked on the door. The father answered, his face drawn and pale. "You gotta help us," he said, barely above a whisper. "It's not safe here." As Ralph and his partner stepped inside, the first thing they noticed was the smell. It wasn't the usual musty odor of an old home. It was sharp and acrid, like burnt hair mixed with rotting meat. Ralph covered his nose instinctively, his eyes watering. "What's that smell?" his partner muttered. The father shook his head, his voice trembling. "It started a week ago. First it was just the smell. Then the sounds started." "Sounds?" Ralph prompted. "Footsteps in the attic when no one's up there, whispering. And then last night..." The man trailed off, his gaze darting to the living room. The family, mother and two teenage kids, sat huddled together on the couch. They looked like they hadn't slept in days. The mother clutched a rosary in her hands, her lips moving in silent prayer. Ralph began his walkthrough of the house, starting with the living room. The claw marks on the walls weren't subtle. They gouged deep into the plaster, as if something with inhuman strength had raked its claws along the surface. Pictures hung crooked, and a deep crack ran along the floorboards. "What about valuables?" Ralph asked. "Anything stolen?" The father shook his head. "Nothing's missing. It's not a person doing this." Ralph didn't respond, but his stomach churned. He moved toward the staircase, where the air seemed heavier, colder. The smell of sulfur grew stronger with each step. His flashlight swept across the walls as he ascended, revealing more scratches. This time they seemed to form shapes, symbols he didn't recognize. The attic door loomed ahead, slightly ajar. Ralph hesitated. He wasn't the type to spook easily. but something about that door made his skin crawl. "Ralph?" his partner called from downstairs. "Yeah," Ralph answered, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm checking the attic." He pushed the door open slowly. The hinges creaked, echoing in the stillness. The attic was pitch black, the beam of his flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. Boxes were strewn across the floor, their contents spilled out like a tornado had swept through. And then he saw it. In the far corner of the attic was a crude altar. It was made of what looked like old wooden planks, arranged haphazardly. Black candles sat melted to the stubs, their wax pooling onto the floor. In the center lay the charred remains of what could only be an animal. A small one, maybe a cat or a rabbit. The smell of sulfur was overpowering now, making Ralph gag. "Joe," he called, his voice sharper. His partner appeared moments later, shining his flashlight over the scene. "Jesus Christ," Joe muttered. The father's voice called up from below, trembling. "What is it? Did you find something?" Ralph didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved closer to the altar, his eyes narrowing. Among the melted wax and ashes were more symbols, etched into the wooden planks. Ralph didn't know what they meant, but they felt wrong. Deeply wrong. "We need to call this in," Joe said, his tone unusually uneasy. "Not yet," Ralph replied. He bent down to examine the symbols more closely. That's when the temperature in the attic plummeted. The warm summer air outside might as well have been a distant memory. Ralph's breath fogged in front of him, and a faint sound began to rise, like a low whisper coming from every corner of the attic. "Did you hear that?" Joe asked, his voice shaky. Ralph didn't answer. The whispering grew louder, almost like chanting, though the words were indecipherable. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The attic was silent again, but the air remained heavy, suffocating. Ralph stood slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the cross he now carried under his shirt. "We need to talk to someone who knows what this is," Ralph said finally. Joe looked at him, wide-eyed. "Like who? The church?" Ralph didn't respond, but deep down he knew that's exactly who he needed.
That night I started to wonder if the family's house was just the beginning. If evil was something you could stumble upon in one place, or if it could follow you home.
So you notice he started wearing a cross now after being a disbeliever for quite some time.
Funny how that works.
But yeah, he's still real hesitant though, because he was like, "We need to call someone who knows about this stuff," and his partner's like, "You mean the church?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know if I want to do that right yet."
Let's not get
kind
crazy.
of thing. But he didn't. Yeah, but he didn't have an answer. But he's like, I mean, who's gonna know it better than that?
Now here's a curious question, and I was thinking about this the other day because I've kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole like a week ago, probably. Because I find the whole Kat Von D thing very interesting.
What, the tattoo lady?
Yes. Do you know much about her anymore?
No. Give me a little concept of what she's up to.
So, as everyone knows, Kat Von D is a tattoo artist.
She became a singer for a bit.
Became a singer for a little bit. Yep.
Yep. I do know that.
Out of nowhere, she became extremely religious. Extremely religious.
Really? Like a mainstream religion?
Like she's blacked out all of her occult tattoos.
Really?
All of them.
I did not know this.
Yeah, she's had tattoo removal and she's blacked out things that was occult related.
Do we know the catalyst for this, or
somewhat? She doesn't talk much about it, but she said that she wanted to keep her because if you know, her husband is very much into occult things. He has
I did not know that.
Yeah, he has like an occult grunge punk rock band is what I would call it.
Okay.
And a lot of their stuff is, some would say, very occult-like in the way they process the music.
Right.
Supposedly, she was, because she used to have like occult things in her house too, Ouija boards. She would have, she would do like spell stuff. Something supposedly happened that scared her so bad that she turned straight to religion.
Of course, she's not telling us what it is, I assume.
No, there's speculation, but I don't think she's came out truly. In fact, she was just baptized recently, like within the last year.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
Like it was scared her so bad, and all of her books on the occult, she said she removed them all from the house. Anything that was occult, she removed from the house, and now she's going through the process of reducing the tattoos.
Now, I would love to have been at that yard sale.
Now, here's the question I've got for you, because this kind of fits in line. This guy goes from a complete skeptic to now wearing a cross.
Right. Yeah.
What if you had
baby steps for him?
Yeah, just baby steps,
Right.
What if something like what happened with, when we don't know what happened with Kat Von D. What if there was something for like you that, because you have not necessarily a cult like tattoos, but like you have stuff. I do though. But my point is like, I don't necessarily know that's why you put them on your skin. Because like some people, like, here's a great example. A lot of people wears a cross doesn't mean they're a freaking Christian. If that makes sense.
Exactly.
They just go,
and I feel like he was halfway on that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's what Ralph was doing. Yeah.
Correct. Now, for you though, like if you had one of those moments and you're like, oh, this is legit and this is giving power somewhere else, and this could be detrimental to me, would you do a Kat Von D?
It's tempting to say some kind of funny answer about that. I guess the best way for me to answer that is there are things that I could find out that would make me change my way of thinking and my way of behaving and what I display for a tattoo.
Because here's what I'm curious about, and I've thought about this a lot. Right. So we're going to these haunted locations, right? And this is just a start. We're doing 2 next year. Yeah. That's going to be 2 complete episodes that's going to come out. We're going to put them separate so they won't be in the same episode. We're going to tease it out. Okay. I'm curious if, because of your occultish like tattoos, if that's going to draw a different type of energy to you.
I hope so. See, the kind of thing that would... The only kind of thing, I'll be more specific, the only kind of thing that would make me change my ways, like learning that ghosts are real wouldn't do it, or even demons that are real wouldn't do it. Yeah. But if I somehow found out, even knowing that God was real might not necessarily do it. But if I found out that he is, and the things that I'm doing affect those around me, that's what would cause me to change.
Now you make me want to ask other questions because I'm curious.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm an open book.
So do you believe in demons?
I think it's fun to believe in them, but I'm not sure. I've seen things I would call ghosts.
Sure, yeah.
I've never experienced anything I would call a demon necessarily. But I like the idea.
Interesting.
Psychoanalyzing me.
I am thinking, because I'm sitting there thinking, like, we've covered enough cases now to where I would say to myself, it'd be really hard for me, like if someone said there's a bullet in this revolver, you have to choose whether you say yes or no, and if you're wrong, you're taking one. I would sit there and think to myself, there's demons. Like for me, there's enough evidence to where I point and I go, even though it's not necessarily 50-50, it might be 55-45, but 55 of it tells me there's got to be a demon.
Right. Yeah.
So for you to be like, it's fun to think of. I'm sitting here thinking, though, he's not a believer yet. Like,
no, I mean, I'm open to it. Probably more open than I was.
Sure.
If I found out that demons did exist, I'd try to find out how I could get that job. Like, I would want to be one.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that you would.
Spectacular.
Because, what I always find interesting is all these people that's into the occult stuff, they dabble just enough, and then they cross a barrier somewhere and they go, oh crap, no, this is like legit. And then they try to backtrack so fast. Kat Von D's a great example of that.
Yeah. No, she must have learned something really crazy, because blacking out tattoo is a very long and painful process.
If you look at her now,
more than getting them.
If you look at her now, you would be shocked with how she looks.
Yeah, I know a guy, one of my best friends actually, who's got a very large chest tattoo that they got recently. One of the toughest people I've ever met. Their appendix was like almost ruptured and stuff, and they didn't even bother them enough to bother going to the hospital till the last moment.
Wow.
He said the pain was so unbearable on that he almost couldn't take it.
Wow.
So imagine getting all that blacked out, because she had chest tattoos, she had leg and arm tattoos, probably neck tattoos, probably foot tattoos, which are one of the most painful. Yeah. So it would be bad.
Yeah, it's super interesting, because like if you go to her Instagram, I think I can send you this. I think this is probably too risque to put on our YouTube channel, because she doesn't leave a lot for the imagination on this one. But she shows her legs, and she had one of her entire legs blacked out because of the occult stuff. Now, she doesn't say that, but if you go back and you look at that legs, you go, that was kind of occult stuff.
Yeah, that was definitely painful, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because it did go onto the top of her foot, which is one of the worst places I've been told.
Yeah.
I guess for me, anything could change my opinion at any time. I can't predict how I'm going to react until I'm in the situation.
For sure, yeah.
But I mean, I don't look at it the way that you necessarily do, that there's any risk to me to not believe in demons, even if it's 50-50.
Sure.
Because up to this point in my life, like, I'm sure I'm more than halfway done my life, not having this answer has not affected me in the slightest. And the chances are it might not in the future. But tomorrow I could learn something that changes it.
See, but like, I sit back and I think to myself, like, even if you look there, like, look at her arms now in that picture I just did.
Right.
Like, how do you go from being completely tattooed up to now taking drastic steps to remove it? You go from agnostic at best. I would even say she was maybe atheist. I don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think she was agnostic either. Because her husband is a very, like, they do very occult. And I think it's like,
so did they split up?
They're still together. In fact, he still does a yearly. It's kind of cool because they do this yearly thing, and his music still plays like the occult stuff, but they come together because she sings on one of the songs, and it's almost like it's a transition from this. The best way I can put it is from like this occult practice to now transitioning into the song that's not occult. That's the two of them.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting thing, and it kind of fits in line with the story we're telling too, but in reverse. You got a guy that's maybe, agnostic at best, and now he's like, oh wait, no, there's things that's happening. And I think you need to experience something to go, oh wait, no, this is legit.
Yeah. Now, he could have gone his whole life and stayed a non-believer, but he just happened to, like he just said at the end of that last part, you can wander into the supernatural, and once you become changed by that, it changes your life. Now, there was years in between these experiences. He's got the same partner and everything now, but his partner saw the same things he did. What happened with this family, by the way, it's not like any of them were doing any devil worshipping upstairs. They had bought this house. That's why there was all the boxes. They hadn't even seen this altar, but there was a cat or something on it. Like, this was one of those real, like, people talk about, Satan worshipers, but like the Church of Satan, they're not really into that. That's just a mockery term they do. But this is like devil worshippers. And I think that's where you can differentiate. These are people who want bad things to happen if they're doing stuff like that.
I would disagree.
Yeah.
I think that there's a facade that's put on for the Church of whatever they call it, the Church of Satan or whatever. And I believe that there is people that follow it because they're like, I just want to be anti-establishment and I want to be anti-church and anti-religion. And see, this now turns into a mockery. But then I believe it's like a great example. If you throw the reverse on it, right? Like Westboro Church, they proclaim to be Christians. I would argue they're not Christian, even though they have the facade of having a church and being good people. And though
I don't think they even have the facade of being good people. Like, they seem awful
to them, right? Because again, we're looking from the outside in, and we're going, you proclaim to be all about biblical reference and following the word of God, but then you do this, like that's not. Some would even say Ray Comfort is taking a page too far and extreme, right? So even though,
well, I disagree with him on everything. I like that guy. I can't help myself. Like, I disagree with him on everything, but I like him.
I understand what he's trying to accomplish. I think he puts his energy in too much of the wrong direction to get there. It's like, I say it all the time, right? It's like, if I'm a good person and I'm trying to follow a godly path, as some would put it, I shouldn't need to tell somebody and force it down their throat. What should happen is when they hit rock bottom or they have a moment where they're like, I don't know what else to do, but hey, my old buddy Bert always seems to be in a good mood and everything seems to be fine. And he always seems to have direction, and they come to me and they're like, and this has happened. I've had people go, dude, I don't understand, like, what's going on with you? Like, I can't quite figure it out. I'm having this really hard time. What's going on? And I go, dude, I pray. Here's what I do. So versus Ray, where it's like I'm shoving it down everyone's throat, I'd rather be an example of what I'm supposed to be doing and then hope that someone comes to me and asks the question then. Yeah.
No, I think that's a better way. But I mean, like, it's kind of like, depending on your interpretation, he believes he's supposed to be doing what he's doing. Like, he's supposed to be going out to preach to people and trying to win their hearts and minds.
There's a difference, though. That's like saying, well, the Christian crusades, the Bible calls for that. No, it doesn't. It happened. And there's reference to it, but it doesn't mean that that's what we're supposed to do now. Like, I hear it all the time. I'm going to tick a whole bunch of people off here, and I really don't mean to. All my Christian peeps, okay? And we don't go really religious, and I'm not going to here either, but for all the pastoral people and stuff that says you're supposed to tithe, that, in my opinion, is completely anti-biblical. I think that's a mockery if we're being 100%. And I believe that goes against everything we're supposed to believe. If I have to pay 10% of my total earnings to a church, then I don't believe that, according to religious reference, Jesus Christ came and died on a cross for my sins, because I'm still paying And even in the Bible, they didn't pay 10%. That's not how that
Right.
worked. There's only so many references in the Bible to a tithe.
Yeah. Well, I don't. So I was hanging out at, I'm not going to say a member of because it never got that far. I wouldn't say, but I was hanging out because I like Bible stories. I like hearing people yell about brimstone and fire and stuff like that. I find that exciting. So I was hanging around a Baptist church. Now they had the 10% tithe, but that was just the tithe. You're supposed to also do an offering on top of that. And they positioned it how the tithe is like everyone who goes to heaven gets a mansion. And then they're like, but if you were to give the offering, maybe yours is just a little bit better. And I was like, this smells bad.
Do you know what that's called?
This smells bad. Robbing people?
It's called prosperity Christianity. The more you give, the better it is.
Right.
And the only thing I'll say on that is, if that's true, then why was every disciple, with the exception of one, massacred on a hectic level? We're talking about people that did exactly what Jesus asked and then had some of the most inhumane deaths and torture for people that paved the way and did significantly more for anyone else. Why would they get the opposite of what the typical world does? You know who does that the most? And it torques. There's two people in it. I hate them so much. I don't hate. Hate is a strong word.
Right.
I dislike
that's
them
a rough
so
word.
much.
Yeah.
Joel freaking Osteen.
Yeah.
Cannot stand that guy. And Benny Hinn. Both of those
Yeah, he
people,
was
in my opinion, I believe they both have a special little place because the Bible says if you mislead your congregation, you're judged separately. So I've got my own judging I've got to deal with, but I'm pretty sure, especially Benny Hinn, you give $40 and we're gonna take that cancer from your body. Like Evander Holyfield.
That faith healing stuff is not good.
Yeah, remember Evander Holyfield where he goes to that Benny Hinn, I think it was Benny Hinn, and he's like, Jesus is fixing that heart condition you got right now. Benny Hinn, you're crazy. You're crazy.
Yeah. He knows it. He knows it's not working. That's a pure scam.
But I do believe the demons work inside the churches just as much as angels and God does.
It's interesting you say that because one of these stories is going to go into that a little bit later.
Ooh,
there was actually a very dramatic event that happened in the basement of a church. That we're going to get into a little later.
If it was the pastor getting inside of a limo and then the cop turned into a reporter and started asking him a question about an airplane.
No, but that's interesting. I don't know what that's about. But
you've never seen that interview?
No.
I forget what that guy's name is.
Is this Benny Hinn?
No, this is like a major. Copeland is the pastor's name.
Oh, Kenneth Copeland.
Yeah. He's getting into his limo, and I think it's like a 60 Minutes or like a Dateline reporter walks up to him and goes, "We heard you got your airplane from Tyler Perry." And she starts going to the congregation.
Oh, I
and he
have
goes,
heard
"Don't
of
you
this.
put that on me. You don't put that on me." And his eyes turn black. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
His pupils
I've
turn
heard
black.
Things about this.
It's this
there's some evil in there.
Scariest. Like when you look at, and then he has that smile, but it was such a scary smile. I'm like, that ain't God right there, my peeps. That's not it. I don't know what that is, but that ain't that.
I talked about earlier that I'd like to be a demon for a job. And I think that an underserved market would be to pick up people at these churches and go right after them directly from there.
Did you ever watch that video I sent you on that previous satanic warlock?
Yeah. He's the one that was on that talk show circuit for a while.
Oh, I don't know if he was. I only saw that one interview.
Okay. Yeah, he was like this. He was the one. He was kind of a larger guy.
Yes.
And it was quite some time ago. Yeah, and he was a big part of the cause of the satanic panic, by the way.
Yeah, and what's crazy is if you remember, That was his job. He went to churches
Right.
to cause
Yeah.
conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something
It can
to
happen
that.
there. It's a building. It's a building just like anywhere else.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, churches get hit by lightning more often than regular buildings because of the steeples. It's just a building. It's just a building.
Correct.
Maybe cool things happen in there, but it's still just a building.
It's no different than the conversation we had earlier.
Right.
I believe we can bring certain energies to us.
Mm-hmm.
Who's to say the same thing doesn't happen in reverse?
Yeah. I live right next to a church, by the way.
And it hasn't burned down with you there, Nick?
No, I can't go past this line, otherwise it starts to burn my skin.
I was going to say, yeah, I'm
But
curious.
yeah, so anyway, they're supposed to be like good people, quote unquote good people, godly people. Every Sunday after church, I have to go and pick up their litter because they just throw it right on the ground. And to me, that's not good. That's not a good person does that.
No.
You know? Like anyway, we're getting off on a tangent here, but basically, you've probably noticed already there's some commonalities between these stories that Ralph is sort of noticing too, because when he got to the door and the light was flickering and there was that oppressive silence, because you'd think, in my head, if I was going to a place that's really demonic, I'd expect to hear all kinds of crazy sounds and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets dead quiet, like abnormally quiet. Like everything knows that it has to be quiet so it's not noticed.
Yeah.
And this has been years in between, and Ralph shows up, and before he even knocks, he feels the presence.
Yes.
And then he investigates and he goes upstairs and he finds that altar and he hears the whispers and everything like that. And it's not just him. He didn't even say anything about it. It was his partner, Joe, that said, "Do you hear that?"
Mm-hmm.
And he had to admit at that point, "Yeah, I hear that."
Yep.
But he's getting drawn into this. He stumbled upon it, just like he said, he stumbled upon it. And now it's happening. I mean, he went 30 something years, never saw a thing, saw one thing, and now a year and a half, 2 years later, he's seeing it again. And it almost seems like if it starts at a high level, you can experience it at a high level more frequently.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's already, like it's taken your mind to that level that you can experience it. Like you're not going to hear knocking and scratching.
Right.
You're going to get full blown, manifestations of stuff.
Exactly.
But are you curious about his next experience?
Absolutely. I'm ready for it.
It was the case that solidified Ralph Sarchie's belief that evil didn't just exist in the abstract. It had a face, a voice, and a purpose. The call came from a desperate mother, Maria, who lived in a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Her son Michael was in trouble. At least that's how she put it on the phone. Her voice cracked with emotion, but she was vague. She didn't want to scare Ralph off. When Ralph arrived, Maria met him at the door. Her hands shook as she led him into the living room, where Michael sat on the couch. He was in his late 20s, with hollow eyes and a gaunt frame. At first glance, he looked like a man battling addiction or severe mental illness. "Tell me what's been happening," Ralph said, keeping his tone calm and steady. Maria hesitated, wringing her hands. "It started a month ago," she said finally. "Michael began acting strange. He would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, speaking words I didn't recognize. Sometimes it's Latin, sometimes I don't know." Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Latin? Has he studied it before?" She shook her head quickly. "No, he's never even been religious. But now he says things, terrible things, about God, about me, about..." Her voice trailed off, and her eyes filled with tears. Ralph glanced at Michael, who sat unnervingly still, his hands gripping the armrests of the couch. "Michael, Do you want to tell me what's going on?" For a long moment, Michael didn't move. Then he slowly turned his head to face Ralph, his lips curling into a small, unsettling smile. When he spoke, his voice was low and gravelly, completely different from the tone he'd used earlier. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Ralph felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Why not?" he asked, keeping his composure. Michael's grin widened and he leaned forward slightly. "Because it's watching you, too." The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, thicker. Ralph swallowed hard and stood up. "Maria, do you mind if I bring someone in to help? A priest?" Michael let out a laugh, deep, guttural, and completely inhuman. "Bring whoever you want. It won't change anything." Ralph left the apartment that night, shaken but determined. He called Father Mendoza, a local priest known for his work with exorcisms. They agreed to return the next evening. When Ralph and Father Mendoza arrived, the apartment was eerily silent. Maria greeted them with dark circles under her eyes. She whispered, "He hasn't slept. He just stares at the wall and mutters." Michael was sitting in the same spot, his posture unnaturally rigid. As Father Mendoza began to pray, Michael's demeanor changed almost instantly. He began to laugh again, rocking back and forth. His laughter turned into screaming, words in Latin, which Father Mendoza translated aloud. "He's cursing us," the priest said grimly. The priest continued the prayers, sprinkling holy water on Michael, who recoiled violently. His body contorted in ways that made Ralph wince. His screams became deafening, and Ralph felt the walls of the apartment tremble, as though the building itself was reacting. Then Michael's voice shifted again, this time to mimic Maria's. "Help me, Ralph," it said, in a perfect imitation of her tone. Ralph froze, his heart racing. He looked at Maria, who was clutching the rosary in her hands, tears streaming down her face. "Don't listen," Father Mendoza warned. The exorcism lasted hours. The room grew unbearably hot, and the stench of sulfur filled the air. At one point, Michael's eyes rolled back, leaving only the whites visible. Ralph could swear he saw shadows moving along the walls, darting and shifting. Finally, with one last piercing scream, Michael collapsed, his body going limp. The room fell silent. Father Mendoza leaned heavily on the arm of the couch, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "It's done," he said softly. Michael opened his eyes, his voice trembling as he whispered, "It's gone. I don't feel it anymore." Ralph exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, but deep down, he knew this wasn't the last time he'd face something like this.
I had always thought of myself as a man of reason, but that night, I realized reason wasn't enough. The rules I lived by didn't apply to the world I had just stepped into.
So he didn't hesitate that time. He called the priest.
Mm-hmm. He better be. He got some doggone demon stuff going on.
He sure did. And what wasn't in the narrative, and sort of problem to this, is that he'd been sort of suffering from nightmares and weird experiences at home and that kind of thing. So when the guy said it's too late, bring who you want, do you remember what he told Ralph?
No.
He's already watching you.
Oh.
Or it's already watching you. It's already watching you. I think that's important to say that.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever, and this is me adding color here, but I think how I interpreted this is whatever Ralph walked in on that first experience he had, he caught a glimpse of something and it caught a glimpse of him.
Eye of Sauron,
and
it's coming back into the story again.
Yeah, it is. Just like you said, it's the Eye of Sauron there.
They put the ring on, and the moment they put the ring on, the Sauron, he could see him. It's like, I see you.
Yeah. Now, I don't think it had the effect that it wanted it to, because Ralph's becoming more religious. And what they don't know is he's been reading a lot, and he's been really deep into the works of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Oh, interesting.
And he's been studying them to an obsessive level. And of course, as you know, they were quite into the religious side of things as well.
For sure.
So I think that's sort of what helped bring him around a bit, because he didn't hesitate this time. He's like, get the priest now.
Yes.
But one thing I found weird is every story I've ever heard of ghosts or demonic presence, it always gets colder. But during this exorcism, the higher the smell of sulfur went, the hotter it got, which I found is unusual. And that sort of brings the image of my mind as they're sending that demon back to hell. So it's getting close to the surface. But I think that's just my imagination. That's like me over dramatizing this.
It's a fun thought process.
Yeah. What's your take on this recent part?
There's a lot of thoughts because, I go back and I think of stories I know, and probably the best example of this I can think of. And I think I did it 4 months ago, 3-4 months ago. I revisited on my channel the story of Roland Doe.
Right, which would be very similar to this kind of thing.
Yeah, very similar. And we covered Roland Doe here also.
Yes.
But what I did on my channel was went into it just from the story standpoint. Here's what happened. Here's what happened next. Versus us, we kind of covered it and we kind of broke things down. On mine, it was simply the story from beginning to end. And whereas on our podcast, I have to, back then we was fitting like 20-minute narration. I'm fitting what should have been an hour-long video into 20 minutes. Right. But it was interesting because there's similarities between what I heard here and even what happened in the story of Roland Doe. In fact, there was one point in time where, and I don't even think we covered this on our podcast, but I think we touched on it, but we didn't go in too deep into it. But Roland Doe was sent to a hospital.
Right.
Now, the hospital he was sent to was technically, I think it was a Catholic hospital. It had some type of Christian notation is how I'll put it. But they was trying to exorcise him inside the hospital. And
I'm surprised the hospital allowed that kind of thing.
It was because it was a Christian-based hospital.
Okay.
So he was put in a special ward that specialized in people that had mental deficiencies. So like people that was so high off their brain, like high as a kite in drugs and stuff like that, like where there was bars on the windows and all that stuff.
Right.
But what's interesting is they were also trying to exorcise this demon out of him. And then he breathed out and then he came back and he goes, it's gone. And the pastor remembered back to something he had read in the Bible that basically, or in their exorcism biblical reference, saying that they're not always gone. Sometimes it's just to fool them. It's to trick them.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that. That's exactly what I'd say. I'd say it right away.
Yeah,
I'd be like, oh, he's gone.
It's kind of
the demon Nicodemus is gone. He's not here.
Correct. It kind of reminds me of, and we just watched it here recently. I don't know if you did or not. Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul.
Oh boy, you've just hit a sore spot. But go ahead.
So I kept telling Jess when we was watching it, I'm like, man, I feel like Tyson's just tricking him right now, like making him think he's tired, so he'll get close enough to clip him. But then, of course, that never happened. But like that was my wishful thinking.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking too. And I kind of thought, well, he's just too old to do this. But then I've seen videos since of how many punches he actually pulled.
Yeah.
And I'm like, he was quick enough that he didn't have to do that. I don't know.
I'm convinced that it was set up now.
Planned.
There's experts that say that's not the case, and there's experts that say it's absolutely the case. For me, the number one was when Paul threw it and he ducked inside, and the moment he ducked inside, he always, if you watch his old stuff, he'd always throw that uppercut when he would do that.
Right.
Paul was wide open, and you can see his arm start to go up, and he pulled it back. And I'm like, not only that, but he's biting his glove the entire time. I'm like, I don't ever remember seeing him do that before.
Yeah, I believe that he had done it before, but it was an anger response more than anything.
Could be.
I don't think it was. It's hard to say on that, but I saw one video where they slowed it down, where Jake Paul had thrown a punch and he came back in and he went like this, which this is really boring for people who are listening only, by the way.
Sorry,
he went like that, and Mike's arm was here, and he was going to come right across his jaw. And he went like this in towards his own body and then just shied away. Like it was actual effort to do this.
The sad part is, and I don't typically wish this on anyone.
Right.
I want to see someone murk him, like real bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I feel like he's making a mockery of the sport.
Yeah. I had a real hate on for him all the way through the match because I thought he was his brother.
Yeah.
Now his brother's the one I can't stand. I've got no particular
Logan from the Japanese forest.
Exactly. That's one of the worst things I've ever heard of. I thought that was him, so that's why I particularly didn't like him. But I saw an interesting thing is, do you know who Andrew Tate is?
Yeah.
He wants to fight Jake Paul, and everyone on the internet was commenting, "Congratulations, Jake Paul, on finding the one person people do want you to beat."
You know, it's funny you said that. This falls into your realm of expertise. He just had a massive cyber attack. Massive.
Andrew Tate?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not
they
a
downloaded
very popular person.
10, I think it was 10 point something terabytes.
Or
maybe it's gigabytes. I can't remember. Huge number. It was either gigabytes. I don't think you could have that many terabytes, but gigabytes then, let's just say, of direct messages that no one else can see. And now they're saying the news outlets are probably going to be combing through those. All the pictures where those people pay that $8,000 to be a special member inside this thing.
Yeah.
They blur their faces out. It's like a special secret society. They also found the Google mailbox that was attached inside that massive cyber attack that has all their faces unblurred.
Good. I think him and his followers are a disgusting bunch of people. And if you disagree with me, this is one topic that I don't care.
Nick's like, I don't care.
Yeah, this is like one topic I'm staunch on. I don't like that guy. I will never like that guy.
I don't mind.
I'd fight him. He'd mop the floor with me, but he'd still have to pay me.
I don't mind the guy. I don't agree with the guy, but like he doesn't bug me. Like I could care less about him.
No, that's a good attitude to have. I hate him though.
That's me with
can't stand him.
Very few people. Like you have to do something really bad for me to be like, I cannot stand you. Yeah.
Well, that's a better way to be. But I mean, I'm the devil of the podcast, so I can have at least one that I really don't like.
I don't know. I said I hated someone earlier, Nick. I had to pull it back. I had to pull the reins back.
Yeah, but you did pull it back though, so that counts. That's still.
I
you
thought
did pull
about
it back. I'm
like,
not pulling this back.
Hate's a strong word. I can't do it.
Actually, you know what? I also don't want to say I hate this guy. I dislike this guy quite a bit.
Look at that.
I don't want to use hate either.
We're bringing you. Listen, Nick. We're bringing you to the light side.
It burns.
But yeah, this is kind of the same thing. Like if you think about it, I think personally when we look at this part of the narration, there's something that's happening. He knows it's happening. Whatever's on this other side, the Eye of Sauron, it knows it's happening. And now I think they're just testing the water. They're just kind of putting it out there, just seeing what happens.
Yeah, they're throwing him events, escalating events.
Yes.
And his personal life suffering about this too. I stayed out of his personal life. This is a guy that's still around.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just going to say stuff that I've heard that he's put out there because he wrote 2 books on the subject, by the way. And I should mention that the one that I read most recently was called Deliver Us from Evil. And there's a movie about it, which is a very fine movie as well. And the book's very exciting, but this stuff was affecting his personal life as well. Like he was snapping at people that he never snapped at before because he was a pretty even keel kind of guy. Like he wasn't getting sleep. He was having weird experiences all the time. So he was getting more into this, but it was affecting him. And I do believe he was being watched, like you said, the Eye of Sauron kind of thing.
Correct.
And I think it was using its puppets to test the waters with him, just like you said.
Or opening up the Eye of Sauron more.
Right. That could very well be.
That's what demons do. Right now, who's to say it's not empowering him because now his demeanor's changing.
That's true.
With all these demonic. Yeah, for him, he's just not living it day in, day out because they don't have a grasp at home.
Right.
But they're putting him in a situation that's causing the same effects to now.
You know, it's a lot like.
What?
Do you remember the Shawshank Redemption?
Yeah.
How little by little he chipped away at that wall with a spoon every day.
Correct.
And that's what the demons are doing. They're chipping away at the walls of Ralph Sarchie.
Correct.
They're trying to get through to him. Because, I mean, if he's becoming a believer and he's a police officer sworn to, like, protect people and they can get to him, man, what a target that would be.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that would get them a medal from the big man down below.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so the other thing to keep in mind is the time between these occurrences is shortening as well. And he's sort of becoming known a little bit for this stuff because the lady called him directly. They didn't call into the station this time. They called him directly. So he's getting a little bit well known and he's been talking to priests and stuff. That's how he knows, go to this guy. He's local. You know, he specializes in exorcism because normally that's a hard thing to get going.
For sure, yeah.
Like, because they don't do it at the drop of a hat. But I think he's got a little authority with these guys that he's like, they sort of believe him a little more.
Even for Ed and Lorraine, every new case they would do, they would have to find the church that would allow, and then they'd have to be sanctioned through the Catholic Church. And like it was a long drawn out process. Yeah,
they have like almost like a checklist that you have to do this. It's like languages being spoken that they have no previous knowledge of.
Yes.
You know, manifesting items, levitation, all that kind of stuff. And you've got to get a certain percentage or they normally won't even think about it. But there's a lot of independent churches that do it at the drop of a hat too. I think it's the Catholic one that's very strict about it. But I bet you I could go to one of these really weird churches around here and have an exorcist in a half hour or my money back.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably so. But when they can't figure it out, who do they always go to?
Ghostbusters.
Catholic Church.
No,
just like the
Church.
Ghostbusters.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right.
Very similar.
But yeah, I don't recall them saying what church this guy was from. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but they did say he was a priest, and I think that's what the Catholic Church uses for their terminology, don't they?
Yes.
So,
well, it depends on where they're from, technically.
Right.
Like in Canada land, they're called archbishops.
Oh, okay.
Some places will call them dioceses.
And
then, you know, you've got...
What about where you're from? Because that's where, like, New York is not too far off from you.
So my understanding is that we still have archbishops here in the States.
Oh, okay.
But my understanding is that regardless of the exorcism and where it occurs, it has to be sanctioned by the Pope. So they're going to the source. This guy must have been like a renegade kind of guy doing it then. Well, because I don't think they would have had time. No, because the Catholic Church, so when you go to like the Pope, like they've got a department. I don't know if you remember or not, when Joe and I was talking, the person that exorcised him was an archbishop from Canada. Oh, I do remember you saying that. Yeah. Or him saying that, actually. Yeah. So, like in a case like that, there was no one that was sufficient within Florida to do it. So they had to go to an archbishop. In his case, did the archbishop make the choice, or did they have to go through a lengthy process before they were able to do it? My understanding, as I know the story, is that Tony Spera had something to do with that. Like he had connections, probably. Well, I feel like there are people. Sorry. Oh, that was Ed and Lorraine Warren's son-in-law. Right. Yeah. So he still has those connections, would be my understanding. Right. Now, my guess is I feel like. Go ahead. I feel like even in the Catholic Church, you probably could convince someone to do it because they're capable of doing it. It's just that they're not supposed to without the Pope's blessing, right? My understanding is they're not supposed to do it at all. Oh, okay. Now you have religions that will, like there's technically Methodists kind of dabble in it also. Oh, okay. So if you find a Methodist church that has an exorcist, and technically when it comes to the Catholic Church, there's a specific preacher and or like archbishop that is sanctioned to do that. So not all, like if you wanted to become a Catholic priest tomorrow, you wouldn't be allowed to do that until you do like the equivalent of X amount of like school is how we would put it, right? Yeah. Yeah. The Catholic Church has a specific school for it now that they've opened, they've had it for a while, but they've opened it up recently to more people. Well, they've added a, what would we call that? Like the X-Files. They've added to the X-Files of the Catholic Church is how we'll put it. It's similar to like, have you ever saw the movie, Nicolas Cage was in it. Where it was. He's done a lot of movies. The Da Vinci. Why can't I think of that? Are you thinking Tom Hanks? No, Nicolas Cage. Oh, okay. He was the treasure hunter guy, and he had all the stuff. Oh, National Treasure. National Treasure. If you think back, there was the second one. I think it was the second one, where they went all the way to like where the Pope was. And they had to unlock this one thing that was there, but they had a committee. That was like a movie version of what is really happening now, is the best way I can put it. Man, where did they get the time to go through all these cases? Angels and Demons, that's what I'm thinking. That's Tom Hanks for sure then. Was that Tom Hanks? Yep. Yeah, based off of Dan Brown novels. Yeah, that is what I'm thinking. Yeah, the Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons. Da Vinci Code, that's what I'm thinking. Not National Treasure. Disregard. I'm being stupid. Very good books, by the way. Spectacular books. I've read them both, but they've been a very long... There's 3. I think I've only read 2. There's 3, right? Yeah, Dan Brown's done a bunch, like The Digital Fortress and all this stuff like that. I mean, all very similar to that one story. Oh, I don't recall. It's been a long time for me too, but I can imagine that. Yeah, because there was the Da Vinci Code, and then Angels and Demons was not a sequel, but they interconnected the 2 stories. Yeah, and then I feel like there was a third one. I'm trying to think what the third one is. I felt like there was a trilogy. There could very well be. It could very well be.
But I guess to bring it back to ours, they must have got a renegade because that person came right over and they did an exorcism for a couple hours.
Yeah. In which, like I say, Methodists, you could do that with a Methodist.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's other religions.
Right.
I just know Catholics and Methodists. The Methodists, typically, when they cannot get an exorcism to quote unquote stick, they go to the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's good that they cooperate a little bit then.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that's what he went through. So he's a full-on believer now, and he's been studying up on the topic. But this is he's had inklings before that this was a little bit about him now.
He's basically a doggone professional.
Yeah, and he's become a character in the story, not just a guy who shows up as a police officer.
Yeah.
Like, they've got their eyes on him. Are you interested in hearing the next part to see what other crazy things happens to Mr. Sarchie?
Heck yeah, I want to see what happens with Tom Hanks.
Ralph had learned to trust his instincts on the streets. He had to. His life depended on it. But as he began to encounter more supernatural cases, his instincts told him something darker was taking root. The eerie feeling he had felt that night in the attic, the growing unease with every new case. It was like a shadow was following him. It was the call about a young girl named Emma that truly began to change his outlook. Emma's parents were frantic when Ralph arrived at their small home. The little girl, barely 8 years old, had been acting erratically. She would scream for hours at a time, and sometimes she wouldn't recognize her own parents. They described her behavior as violent, almost feral, as if she was under the control of something else. At first, Ralph tried to explain it away. Maybe it was some form of trauma, a medical issue, or just bad behavior. But the more he listened, the more certain he became. Something wasn't right. The house had a stifling, oppressive atmosphere. The windows were shut tight, though it was a warm day outside. A thick, stale air hung inside like something had been trapped there for too long. Emma's room was at the end of the hall, and Ralph felt a cold draft as he approached her door. When he entered, he found the girl sitting on the floor, eyes wide open, her body unnaturally still. Her mother, Maria, stood by the door, wringing her hands. "She hasn't been the same since the night she went to the woods," Maria said, her voice trembling. "The woods?" Ralph repeated. Maria nodded. "I didn't think much of it at first, but she came back with something. She kept talking about a shadow, something watching her." Ralph turned his gaze to the little girl, whose eyes followed his every movement. Her skin was pale, and her pupils were dilated, as if she hadn't slept in days. "Emma," Ralph said gently, kneeling down to her level. "Can you tell me what happened in the woods?" The girl stared at him, her lips curling into a slow, eerie smile. "It's already here," she whispered. "It's waiting for you too." Ralph felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced over at Maria, who looked equally disturbed. Suddenly, Emma's gaze shifted to the corner of the room, her smile widening. She stood up, moving unnaturally fast, almost as though she wasn't in full control of her own body. "The eyes," she muttered. "The eyes are everywhere." Ralph's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to follow her gaze. The room was bathed in shadow, but for a brief moment Ralph thought he saw something. Eyes glowing faintly from the dark corners. He blinked, and they were gone. "What eyes, Emma?" Ralph asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The girl's voice grew louder, a chilling chant that filled the room. "They watch me. They're watching you too, Ralph. They're waiting." Ralph stood up quickly, his mind racing. He had seen enough to know that this wasn't normal. It wasn't some child's wild imagination. Whatever Emma had brought back from the woods, it wasn't just a story, it was real. He turned to Maria. We need to get help. This isn't something I can handle alone." Before he could say another word, Emma let out a loud, high-pitched scream. Her body twisted violently, as if she were being jerked by invisible forces. Ralph grabbed her, trying to steady her, but her strength was unnerving. The temperature in the room dropped, and Ralph could see his breath in the air. The lights flickered, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, as if they were reaching for him. "Ralph!" Maria cried, her voice frantic. "What's happening?" The girl's body spasmed, her mouth contorting in a grotesque grin. "It's too late," Emma said, her voice not her own. "It's already inside." Suddenly, everything went still. The room returned to its normal state, and the chill dissipated. Emma slumped forward in Ralph's arms, unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Ralph took a step back, his heart racing. The air around him still felt wrong, heavy with something he couldn't name. "Get her to a hospital," Ralph said urgently, "and call a priest, now." As Ralph drove home that night, his mind was spinning. He had seen this kind of thing before, the violent, unpredictable behavior, the unearthly strength. But the eyes, the sense of something watching, it was different this time. This was something deeper, something ancient. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girl's face twisted in that horrible grin, and in the darkness behind her, he could see the glowing eyes again. He knew then that he wasn't just fighting evil in a spiritual sense. He was up against something older, something that had been lying dormant in the world for centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise again.
When you start to understand what's lurking in the shadows, it becomes hard to ignore it, and harder still to stay in the light. That's when it starts following you.
Isn't it ironic that you kept saying the Eye of Sauron, and what happens in this segment?
Exactly.
He sees the eyes. The girl sees the eyes, he looks, and for a moment, he sees the eyes, the Eye of Sauron, we'll call it, and he blinks and it's gone.
You know, the funny thing is, everyone probably thinks, even though we say the other person doesn't know.
I know what you're going to say, yeah.
Everyone's like, he knew this was going to happen in this story.
Nope, not even in the slightest. Unless you heard the first parts and you know this story, but I think I've brought this up before and you've not known this story.
I don't know this story yet.
Right.
But you know what?
It's just that there's commonalities.
That's what I was just getting ready to say. You know what it is?
Yeah.
There's commonalities. And again, it goes back to like when I have a quote unquote epiphany, or you have one when it's my story, it's because we've already heard this before. In fact, when we talk about these eyes, what other case have we saw where there was eyes mentioned?
I never do good on these quizzes because there's so many episodes for me to think back on now.
We've already mentioned it.
Recently?
Tonight. We've mentioned the case
Rolling
tonight.
Dough. Rolling Dough. It's got to be Rolling Dough, right? No?
Nope.
What one was it?
Joe.
Oh, yes.
He was
I
in
forgot
that
that we
bed,
talked about Joe earlier.
and all the eyes was staring at him. And he was hiding underneath the blanket in the bed. And he said he could always see the eyes.
Yeah.
The eyes was always watching.
Oh, man. I remember that vividly now.
Yes.
That was creepy. And that's just like this.
It's just like this.
That's wild. That makes it extra creepy now.
But you know, that's what
I didn't remember that.
That's the thing. When you think about all the cases, and in my head, like when I hear something where I'm like, that's creepy, it kind of just sticks with me. So, you know, when I hear it again, I go, that's crazy because it was in this story over here too.
Yeah. Oh, it's pretty wild, especially that. And I've heard it in other ones as well.
Yes.
But there's another part of this that's kind of creepy too, that when I was going through these stories, and even when I was reading the original book, I never really caught on to this, but I've caught on to it. Every single time he's come across these entities, they've behaved the same way like a single person might. I think it's a single entity that he keeps seeing.
Oh, yeah.
Because what keeps happening is every time he comes in and the thing turns its head around, what is the first thing it does? A big grin stretches across his face. It's like, Ralph's here.
But remember, I told you that tale also a few months ago with Derek Prince, the guy that wrote the books on demonology. Right. He said he went to Africa and the demon smiled at him and said, "We've already met." And he goes, "Where did we meet?" And then he recited an exorcism that he was a part of, and he didn't believe him. And he told the entire case, the person he was inside, the date, the time, everything.
So overall, these are kind of ineffective if we're talking globally. Like to that one person, it drives them out, but they seem to just be gone for a short amount of time.
But here's the thing. Joe mentioned this in our episode 2. He believes that demons are interdimensional that has no reference of time.
Right.
So for them, it's a sliding scale. What happens within a year is like a minute for them. So 1 minute they're here, 1 minute they're over there. For them, the time frame's the same because time is not on a scale versus in our dimension, time is on a scale.
That's true. I feel like in this particular case, though, it is one that is expecting to see Joe. Not Joe. Well, Joe's his partner. But expecting to see Ralph. Like, this is the 4th time.
No.
And every time it's the same manner.
Think what I'm saying. Think what I'm saying.
Like it's all happening at the same time?
Nope. Let me take you back to what Joe said.
All right.
He said this on our podcast. When I was a kid, I dealt with the same demons my entire life. For them, they're not doing this and then going to this next event and then going to this next event and going to this next event. They're fast forwarding to realign themselves back to meet Joe again. So in this case, the demon from the first time, he goes, I want to mess with him again. So he realigns because time's not a factor. So he's not going from thing to like we have to. Today I'm going to bed, and then tomorrow I'm going to work, and then I'm doing the podcast, and I'm doing the. There is none of that. They're going, let's mess with him again, and then they're fast forwarding for them. They're just moving to the next event. What could be a year later for, you know, in this case, our cop, forget his name, but
Ralph.
Yeah. So for them, it's the same instance, but they're not worrying about time. So their job, that one demon's job, is now to make sure that he's realigning himself every single time with Jeff.
That would kind of line up.
Yes. And that's what Joe said. Joe said, I dealt with the same demons over and over again. And he said, it took me until I was an adult to figure out, oh, wait, time isn't a factor.
Yeah.
So it's like they're realigning themselves. And like he said, my thought process is if something doesn't quite align, they can then go back in time, which is what we always want to do to make sure they're perfectly aligned. So time's not a factor. They're moving up and down that scale.
Right. Unless there was something that definitively stopped their plans. Because that sometimes happens too. People do escape from underneath these at some point. Some people do anyway, not everyone.
Well,
so there must be some ways that yeah. But then once they're driven out from that person, it's not like they've gone anywhere. They just move on to someone else elsewhere, it seems.
Yeah, within the scale. But remember, just because something happens today, doesn't mean that tomorrow it's not open game again. It goes back to
I guess we have
voodoo.
heard cases of I guess we have heard cases of where people years later have been sort of reinfected by the same demon.
It goes back to voodoo, right? Voodoo is a great example of this. In voodoo,
right,
or even in satanic worship, there's a difference. There is a curse,
right,
and then there's a blood oath curse, and both have varying weight. When there's a blood sacrifice that's a curse, the demon goes to the person's whatever to carry out the curse. If they're protected by God, they wait. They don't go anywhere. They wait until that person is out of God's grace, and then the curse occurs. If it's just a straight curse without blood, the demon goes. If for some reason he's protected by God, the demon leaves and the curse doesn't exist.
Right.
So even though this demon, again, they're not on a time scale. They might move on to someone else, but for them, there's no variant time scale. They might be coming and going as they please. Sorry, Mom and Dad. I know that's interdimensional. Sorry about that, but
it's time though. It's not interdimensional. Actually, time is a dimension. So
it's a dimensional.
Sorry, that's interdimensional.
Sorry, Mom and Dad.
I tried to defend it, but
sorry,
we broke it already. Broke the rule already.
Apologize for that. Listen, but that fits. But again, that comes back from Joe. Now, here's the thing.
That's interesting.
Is Joe like a genius on the paranormal? No, he talked about his experience. That's his experience. But it connects.
Yeah.
Even with the story.
It does connect. It sure does connect with a lot of this stuff. Like some of the stuff he said.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard elsewhere too. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Now, the question is, like, even when we was doing this, the other thing that I was thinking was, they talked about an oppression that was occurring, right?
Yes, absolutely.
What's the 3 stages?
Oppression is like this. I can't remember what order they go in, but there's depression, oppression, suppression, or was that not one of them?
So a lot of people add that. So the way it typically works is there's depression, then it goes to oppression, and then it becomes possession.
Okay. Yes, that makes more sense.
She brought this thing back from the woods. Who's to say she wasn't already depressed? It's already working on her. She goes there. There becomes a case of oppression. Why did she
go to the woods?
Right.
In the middle of the night. Why did she go to the woods?
Right. So this was a story that was already happening.
Yeah, this was already in the works. And she, once again, called Ralph.
Right.
So, exactly. I don't know if you noticed I threw in an owl in there.
I did. Who?
Yeah. See, they're involved in everything. Everything.
Talking about owls, man.
Yeah. For more history, listen back to past episodes.
Correct. Them doggone owls will get you.
That's right. But yeah, so she didn't, like, this kid just didn't get up in the middle of the night, unlock the door. She probably couldn't even reach the deadbolt.
Right.
Somehow she got out of the house, went into the woods in the middle of the night. Her parents were frantic. Her mom was frantic anyway. There's no dad in the picture there. Her mom was frantic. She found her. She knew she was in the woods. Kid wouldn't say anything about what she'd seen, just vague things, mumblings, and just plopped herself down and sat there and stared. And just like you said, time's not a factor. They just sit there in the same position and they wait till Ralph shows up.
Right.
Because they know he's going to show up.
Right.
And what's the other common factor? Each time it's escalating. It's getting worse and worse each time.
Right.
Do you think it's possible that it could get even worse from here?
Of course, because
in
now
our final segment,
what we're talking about is, and what you're vaguely bringing up is, I don't think these are just separate cases. There's a reason it's all aligning. Is because it's working on our boy Ralph.
It is. And I think, and I'm going to come out and say it down, you'll see why I say this, is I think this is a single entity that's working on something that I don't think I've heard many many stories about is this thing seems to be trying to manifest itself into the world, not just through possession.
Yeah.
Which have you heard of many stories about that? Because I have not.
There's stories where that has occurred. I did one on my podcast maybe 7-8 months ago where it was trying to, technically possession is manifesting itself into the world because the people technically go somewhere else.
Yeah. But that's more like of a personality thing.
What do you mean?
This, like, it's replacing the person and using its shell in a possession, right?
Yeah, as a vessel, yes. What you're talking about is being its own entity within.
Right, or turning the vessel into its own physical body. But I guess I shouldn't do too much spoilers about this.
But in the same regard, that is what possession always is.
Right. Them trying to turn it into their own physical form.
The theory is, and again, this isn't my theory, this is someone else's theory.
Right.
Possession is not to take control of the person's body and be them.
Right.
Did we cover this on this podcast or on mine? I can't remember. There was a story where a set of boys, I got to be careful because this is kind of dips into YouTube policy. These two boys did a horrendous thing.
Right.
And I think I did this on my podcast. When they did it, they unsubscribed a girl and threw her head into a well.
Right.
And when the psychics got there, they said the scary part is they keep looking for somebody's body so they can, in essence, relive. But it was the demon of the boys that did that.
Right.
So they're always trying, because apparently when you're in whatever dimensional plane that is, they don't have a sense of smell or taste like we do.
Right.
That's technically a gift is how they look at it. They're ticked off that we have that gift and they do not. So they want to live our body and be themselves.
Right.
But it's like that cockroach thing, the wasp that kills and then inserts its larva, and then it takes the what do they call that? The larva of the wasp is controlling the body of the cockroach.
Right.
So technically it possesses the cockroach. The cockroach is no longer there. The cockroach is technically dead.
Right.
It's like a zombie cockroach. The concept's the same. It's just a human body and then demonic possession that's occurring.
Yeah. Now, do they sometimes transform the human body in monstrous ways?
Every time. Every story.
Yeah. Then this is more normal than I expected. Then,
like if you look at
you know what.
The best one, if you look at the pictures, is if you look at the case of Emily Rose. Look at pictures before she was possessed and look at pictures after she was possessed.
Right.
They look like two different people.
Yeah, I've seen those. That is true.
Or think about when we talked about the infield, that little girl, even though they said her face changed, but more importantly, her voice completely contorted to a different, she wasn't in there anymore.
Yeah.
And when she would come back, she's like, what happened? She never knew what happened.
Yeah. I think so. This next segment, I'm a little more skeptical about it, and I think you'll see why. Because those are sort of mild cosmetic changes. Like if you saw this person, you might just think they're messed up for drugs and stuff like that.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Like it still looks like a person in general.
Yeah.
So you know what? Play the next one and you'll see what I'm talking about, because I've not heard cases like this so much.
Yeah, let's take a look. Let's see what it is. I don't know this case, so let's.
I was explaining it wrong, I'm sure.
It's okay. Hey, let's see what happens.
Months had passed since Emma's case, and Ralph had hoped to move on, to push the memories of that haunting night deep into the recesses of his mind. But no matter how hard he tried, the nightmares, the whispers of evil, continued to plague him. He could still feel the chill of the darkness lingering, creeping into the corners of his thoughts. Then a call came that would drag him back into the heart of the unknown. It started like any other investigation. Ralph and his partner, Joe, were called to look into a series of strange disturbances at a local church. Parishioners had reported hearing noises in the basement, whispers, dragging sounds, and growls that sent shivers down their spines. At first, it seemed like the work of vandals, but the urgency in the reports made Ralph uneasy. When they arrived, the church was eerily quiet, save for the priest, Father Jacobs. He was an older man, his face worn and weary. He greeted Ralph and Joe with a grave expression. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly. "Something's been happening for weeks. People have seen things, shadows moving, objects shifting. It's not right." Ralph glanced at Joe, who nodded in agreement. "And you've seen these things yourself?" Father Jacobs hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the basement door. "I have. In the basement. There's something down there. I don't know what it is, but it's not human." With little more than a tense nod, the three of them descended into the basement. The moment they reached the bottom of the stairs, the temperature plummeted, a cold so intense it bit at their skin. The flickering overhead lights cast long, unsettling shadows across the damp stone walls. Old crates lined the space, forgotten remnants of the church's past, but the strange noises drew them toward the far corner. "Do you hear that?" Ralph whispered, his breath turning to mist in the icy air. Joe's hand was on his gun as he nodded. "Yeah, it sounds like scratching." They moved cautiously toward the source of the noise, and there in the corner, they saw it. A figure was crouched low, its back turned to them. Its movements were erratic, jerking like a broken puppet. As Ralph's flashlight swept across the creature, his breath caught in his throat. It was a man, or what had once been a man. His skin was tight over his skull, the flesh gaunt and gray. His fingers were unnaturally long like claws, dragging across the floor. "God," Joe's voice was barely a whisper. The creature turned its head slowly, its black eyes locking onto them with an intensity that made Ralph's blood run cold. And then it spoke, its voice a twisted echo of 1,000 whispers. "You've come too late," it hissed. "It's already begun." The creature lunged. Ralph's heart raced as the thing flew toward them, its claws extended, ready to tear them apart. "Get back!" he yelled to Joe, his voice desperate. But Joe was already retreating, his face pale with terror, hands shaking as he reached for his gun. Ralph didn't need to tell him twice. He knew they were in danger. This was no ordinary creature, no simple monster. It was evil, pure and simple, and it wasn't bound by the same rules of reality. "Joe, get out of here!" Ralph barked, urging his partner to run. "Get the priest, now!" Joe hesitated, fear written across his face, but Ralph's voice cut through his panic. Joe turned and bolted for the stairs, leaving Ralph alone in the face of the creature. The thing's movements were unnervingly fast, its claws scraping the stone floor as it stalked toward Ralph. The air thickened, suffocating, as though the darkness itself was pressing in, trying to crush him. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he knew he couldn't leave. Not this time. Ralph's fingers fumbled at his belt. He pulled out the small vial of holy water he always carried, hoping it would be enough. Father Mendoza's warning echoed in his mind. In the face of true darkness, even faith may not be enough. With a quick prayer, he threw the holy water into the air, hoping to create some kind of barrier. The creature screeched, recoiling, but it didn't stop. It only grew angrier. In the blink of an eye, it lunged at Ralph, its claws slashing through his coat, tearing into his flesh. pain exploded through his arm, but Ralph fought through it, instinctively reaching for his gun. He knew bullets wouldn't help, but it was the only weapon he had left. Just as the creature closed in, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Ralph turned to see Father Mendoza, his face pale but resolute, holding a crucifix in one hand and a Bible in the other. The priest didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his voice rising in Latin as he began to chant an ancient exorcism. The creature hissed, its form flickering and distorting as the priest's words cut through the air. The temperature dropped even further, and the oppressive darkness began to retreat, the shadows shrinking back as the creature's form wavered. With one last furious screech, the creature lunged at them, but Father Mendoza's prayer slammed into it like a wave. The thing's body crumpled, dissolving into nothingness. Silence fell. Father Mendoza approached Ralph, his expression grim but steady. "It's gone," he said softly. "For now." But Ralph knew. He could feel it in his bones. This wasn't the end. The fight against evil wasn't over. The creature had been banished, but something deep inside Ralph told him the darkness would follow him, always lurking, waiting for the right moment to return. As Ralph and Father Mendoza left the church, the priest placed a hand on Ralph's shoulder. "You did good, son. But remember, this is just the beginning. The darkness you've seen won't leave you. It'll follow you." Ralph didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew. He had a long road ahead, and somewhere deep in the shadows, the darkness waited for its next opportunity.
The two different types of evil exist. Primary evil, which comes from the devil, and secondary evil, which is the evil that people do.
This is a lesson that we all must struggle with.
So you could probably see why that part I'm a little skeptical about, because I've not heard any stories where the body just dissipates. This doesn't seem like it was in a human body. It seemed like it had some kind of flimsy body of its own.
Yeah.
I've not heard anything of the sort.
So I've heard of stories where they speak of trying to manifest, but they can't.
Right.
I can't think of a story where they have.
Unless, I'm just thinking now, and I'm just spitballing this, like a lot of times we hear stories of unique monsters that are only seen like once or twice.
Yeah.
And there's not like a bunch of them. What if they are partial manifestations that just don't last long? Sort of like foam in the sea kind of thing. Yeah. They can put it together, but it's not like they can't create a body like, you know.
Technically, that's a skinwalker. That's why they never manifest correctly.
Right. Yeah. So I wonder if that's some kind of relation there. Because this thing seems like it's just been provoking, getting more power. And then in the basement of this church, it tried to put something together for itself. That's what I'm taking from this.
Or it never manifested.
Right.
But it created the illusions. So, you know,
that it had.
Yeah. So, like, let's use, for example, we talk about in some of these demonic cases where there's things that scare the priests that come in that's not really there, like blood shooting through, or let's use, for example, blood forming in a sink and pouring from the fixtures and stuff. The blood was never there, but the illusion was it created.
Yeah, you know, that makes sense. You see that a lot in horror movies and stuff like that.
Yeah. But it happens a lot in possession movies too. Like, let's use, for example, what was that? What possession case was that? Bobby Mackey, the I did a podcast on my channel for Bobby Mackey's Bar. Don't know how well versed you are with that one.
Not very.
It's a really popular haunted attraction, and I think it's in Kentucky. And what makes it so interesting was this bar had always had like a ton of different things going on. Like the police was always there. This guy buys it, and after he buys it, there's like little hints that there's stuff going on. His wife comes in and she's like, I don't know, like I don't really feel good about this place. Like it's fine, like we're already in the lease and blah 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 blah. Anyway, she's in the kitchen and she hears these sounds and she's starting to freak out. She's pregnant at this point. And all of a sudden she starts like feeling weird. And then she goes over and she starts washing the dishes. And as she's watching it, blood starts filling the sinks. She freaks out. And as she's starting to walk backwards, something grabs her by the hair of the head and tries to push her into the blood in the sink. She starts screaming. She ends up falling backwards. The guy comes in and she's like, look at this sink. And he goes, there's no blood in there. So it's like, if they can manifest that kind of stuff, I don't think it's far-fetched to believe that they can manifest what we perceive as a creature, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's just an illusion, and that does make a lot of sense to me. Because if that was an illusion and he, flung a prayer at it and it just caused it to dissipate, like I said earlier, like foam, I mean, that would work really well on an illusion, but it wouldn't work so much on a physical body. So that does make a lot of sense. I watched the movie Smile 2 recently. Have you seen any of those? Smile or Smile 2? Well, basically, it's essentially a demonic possession movie series. And one of the things is you'll think that you're winning against it or you're doing something, but it's actually tricked you into thinking all this is going on just to mess with you. So it pretends that you've killed it at one point, and it's like, this isn't real, and then they're right back to where you started, kind of thing. So that's creepy. Does fit with this. This is a creepy story.
It's a very creepy story. I love it. Question is, all of you at home, what did you think? Do you think this is a true case? What was the name of the books again?
Deliver Us from Evil is the second one he did.
I think that's on my list.
The first one, it's real good. I read it initially years ago when we lost power for about a week. And that book kept me company, and it was a really good read, especially not having it any light but a candle to read by. Let me see what the other one. He wrote one before that, I believe.
We need to put a link in the description down below for his book if you're interested.
Beware the Night.
Beware the Night.
Yeah, that was the first one, I believe. But the one that became very familiar was Deliver Us from Evil, which, like I said, there is a good movie about that too.
Well, you're definitely going to have to let us in the comments down below what you think of it. And also, listen, this ain't free, okay? We require you hit that freaking subscribe button.
That's right.
Bunch of freaking
the power
freeloaders.
Of the Lord compels you to press that button.
That is facts.
But throw holy water on you.
Exactly. Hopefully y'all enjoyed this podcast. I enjoyed this. One's a super long one. Y'all are welcome. It's going to be like 2 hours and 18 minutes, 19 minutes, something like that.
Yeah. Plus if you like that, you're welcome. If you don't like that, sorry.
Well, hopefully y'all enjoyed it. Until we see you on the next podcast.
Goodbye.
Little demon.
Little demons.
I feel the weight of shadows crawling near. A breath behind me whispers in my ear. The chords creak like a broken hymn. Every step I take pulls me deeper in. The walls are alive, they know my name. The silence is deafening, driving me insane. I see the marks etched into the stone, a story of torment written in bone. There's a veil between what's real and lies, a crack in the dark where the evil hides. I've seen their faces, I've heard their screams. I'm walking through the ruins of shattered dreams. Oh, the veil of sin is thin tonight. I'm fighting the pull of the fading light, a force unseen, but it's clawing at me in the grip of something I can't set free. Oh, the veil of sin whispers my name. It's a dangerous dance, a twisted game. They're calling me closer, I'm losing control. The darkness is digging into my soul. The air is thick, like smoke from hell. I can taste the fear in the stories they tell. Every prayer I've spoken feels like a fraud when I stand face to face with the wrath of God. Candles flicker but the flame won't stay. The shadows are moving, they're leading the way. I'm chasing answers I don't wanna know, while the seeds of chaos begin to grow. There's a veil between what's real and lies, a crack in the dark where the evil hides. I've seen their faces, I've heard their screams. I'm walking through the ruins of shattered dreams. Oh, the veil of sin is thin tonight. I'm fighting the pull of the fading light, a force unseen, but it's clawing at me in the grip of something I can't set free. Oh, the veil of sin whispers my name. It's a dangerous dance, a twisted game. They're calling me closer, I'm losing control. The darkness is digging into my soul. Leave this place, they said to me, but you can't run from what you can't see. They're in the air, they're in my mind, binding me to what's left behind. Every cry is a melody of pain, every scream's a part of the refrain. Oh, the veil of sin is tearing apart, pulling me deeper into the dark. A force unseen, but it's clawing at me. I'm trapped in chains, I'll never break free. Oh, the veil of sin whispers my name. It's a dangerous dance, a twisted game. They're calling me closer, I'm losing control. The darkness is digging into my soul. They're watching, they're waiting. I'm theirs now, no escaping.